All right, ladies and gentlemen. So today is March 25th, 2020, and we're going to be going over a couple of things today just to clarify a few misconceptions and misunderstandings that we've had. So the first thing we're going to look at today is immigration to the United States during this time period. This is a time period where people are dealing with racism, nationalism. America has just won World War One, and we kind of think we're superior, but at the same time, you have people who just don't want to get involved in anything anymore, don't want to deal with um, issues that are going on in Europe and stuff like that, especially after the horrors of World War One and what's going on in Russia currently at this time, which is the Russian Revolution, which is last year that we just finished. So, stemming the foreign flood. Immigration began after the war. Between 1820 and 1821, there was 800,000 immigrants. Most of these people, two-thirds of them, are from southeastern Europe. This is your Italians, your Spanish from Spain, your Portuguese, where only one-third is everyone else, mainly your Northern Europeans, your English, German, and French. So to stem this flood, they issued the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. This is only a temporary measure, only lasts for a few minutes, for a few months supposedly, but winds up lasting a lot longer. The quota of 3% of people from the nationality who has been in the U.S. in 1910. This means that they looked at the census from 1910. Now we have the census coming up this year, which is very important for all of you to fill out and make sure you get it done correctly and send it in, so you're all accounted for. You, your parents, your cousins, friends, whoever. So you look at the census and look at how many people from a certain country are in the United States, and then only allow 3% of those people to come in. Now, if there's 100 people, that means only 3 people are allowed now to come in. But when you're looking at hundreds of thousands or millions, 3% is still a lot of people coming in. And by 1910, there's a lot of people from South and Eastern Europe in the U.S. Right? Because there's still so many people coming in, they issued the Immigration Act of 1924. This cuts the quota from 3% down to 2%. Again, when you're looking at millions of people, this 1% decrease is still hundreds of thousands of people who are now not allowed to enter the U.S. Between 1890 and 1910, there is a huge influx of these Southeastern Europeans coming in. In 1890, there's very few people from Italy, Spain, and Portugal in the United States. However, by 1910, there is a lot. Britain is allowed to send almost 66,000 people to the United States, where Italy had to send less than 6,000, even though Italy is bigger than England. The reason for this is they believe that Northern Europeans were superior to Southern Europeans, even though they're all technically white and they're all Europeans. They believe that the English, the Germans, and the French are more superior than the Italians, the Spanish, and the Portuguese, because English, German, and French have been in the United States for hundreds of years at this point, where the um, other ones, the Southern Europeans, are more newcomers. The Japanese start holding hate America rallies because immigration from Japan just completely stops. Now, this leads to will eventually lead to Japan bombing us at Pearl Harbor in 1941 because they're just getting fed up with the way America treats them. And if we think back to the end of World War One 2 units ago, Japan was on the winning side. Japan was on the US, England, and France's side. However, when it came to the peace treaty, the other allied powers basically told Japan, just sit in the corner, we'll take care of everything, you don't have to worry about it, and they got absolutely nothing. The one exception to this rule are Canadians and Latin Americans. When they need jobs, for whatever reason, they are allowed to send their people here to take those jobs. However, when the economy starts getting hit hard and there's not too many jobs, they are sent back home and deported. So they're basically just used when needed, and when they're not needed, they're sent away. 1924 Immigration Act becomes a turning point in history. A period of free immigration comes to an end. You can no longer just come in here whenever you want, however you want. There's now checks and balances, immigration process, papers to be filled out. It's a lot more difficult to come here. Three, 35 million immigrants from the 1800s start forming a patchwork of communities. This is why you have places like Chinatown and Little Italy. There's a lot of Puerto Rican areas where it's mainly Puerto Rican, so on and so forth. They share customs, they share values, they share languages with each other, so therefore they kind of stay together. Okay, so that was a little bit on the immigration. So now we're going to look at prohibition. Now, prohibition is the fact that they made alcohol consumption, sale, and making it illegal in the United States. So, it's a prohibition experiment, and in 1919, it becomes the 18th Amendment passed. Now, in this time period, there's a few amendments passed, added to the Constitution, which becomes the law of the land. The prohibition one, the 18th Amendment, is the only one to ever be repealed, to be removed, as in later on there's a separate amendment that ends it. This is the culmination of years of aggregation by progressive reformers, churches, and women, mainly from women. Now, if we think about the time period, if you were in my class last year, we watched Iron Jawed Angels, where the women were fighting for the right to vote, the Suffrage Act. This is going on during World War One. A lot of the men are overseas fighting. Women are fighting for the right to vote. They eventually get the right to vote. They don't like all this alcohol consumption because life at this time is difficult. People are working long hours. They're not getting paid much. They're the only ones that are winning the money, and the ones that are coming back from World War One are kind of stuck with PTSD and kind of screwed up. Sorry. So a lot of these women don't like it because the men are coming back. They're going. They're getting really drunk, coming home. The wives are complaining, nagging, or just not doing what they want them to do, and they're beating the wives up. So a lot of these women do not want men um, drinking like this. So they eventually stop it in the Volstead Act of 1919. Congress passes a law to enforce it. It is now completely illegal to make alcohol, to sell alcohol, or to consume alcohol in the United States. So there's sectional differences between us. The South actually supported it. Traditional morals and desire to control African Americans. Um, but a lot of these people did not live in big cities, so they had their own farms or like their own land. They're not going out to bars or saloons to have a drink with friends. They're having it at the house. So if they are drinking, it's not in the public eye. So they're fine with not having it sold in bars and stuff like that because it doesn't really affect them. The West, the same thing. The West, think of cowboys. You know, they're going in the saloons. This is like 50 years earlier, but they're going in the saloons. They're drinking. There's gunfights. There's a lot of public drunkenness. There's prostitution, corruption, and crime going on in this area. So by making alcohol illegal, that should solve the problem. The only area that opposed it is the East. This is like your New Jersey, your Massachusetts, your New York. There's a lot of immigrants here in big cities, and they have social contracts between them. It's a lot of times built around alcohol. They go out drinking together, they have a good time together, and because of this, they share different customs, as we said before, and it allows them to kind of keep their own traditions alive. And now the U.S. government has just taken that away from them. So why does some of this fail? Tradition of alcohol in America. Alcohol consumption has been a big part of America, has been a big part of the United States for years. One of the first people to come here in Jamestown, the first people to come here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, the Pilgrims, they made their own alcohol. In fact, the largest alcohol producer in the United States was actually George Washington in the late 18th century, so 1780s, 1790s. There's a tradition of weak control by the central government. The president in the U.S. government did not have much control of people's day-to-day lives. The only one that exercised a lot of control was Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. But other than that, mostly mayors and governors actually controlled people's day-to-day lives, and the only thing the U.S. government really controlled was money at some point, but postal service, mail delivery. It's difficult to enforce a law which the majority or a strong minority opposed. Many people were against this. So if there's a lot of people against it, it's very difficult for them to actually have um, the ability to enforce these laws. This disillusionment of the war led to the question of idealism and self-denial in general, and soldiers argued the laws passed while they were away in Europe. Again, many of these men who'd go out drinking and enjoyed this were out fighting a war in Europe. So when the vote came for this amendment, they were unable to vote because they were not there. So they come back and they're thinking, why do I have to sit here and face a law which I had no say in? Especially after the horrors and everything they saw in World War One. The one thing they want is to come back and be able to have a drink, and they can't even do that. And finally, there is understaffed and underpaid federal employees. A lot of these people just aren't getting paid enough to really deal with this. So in the end, if it becomes too much of a headache, they're just gonna look the other way. Violations of the law. Opponents believe that violating the law is the only way to get it repealed. They feel that if enough of them just did not follow this law, eventually the US government would be like, all right, it's not going to work. We're just going to get rid of it. Speakeasies replace saloons. So a saloon is basically a bar that you could go in anytime you want and drink. Now, since it's illegal, they make speakeasies. These are private bars, privately run organizations. They could be held in a basement or in someone's house or even at a converted bar that has the door closed. You may have seen in movies where someone in gangster outfits knock on the door, and rather than the door open, a little window slides open and they ask for a password or a special knock or like a coin or something to show up. Those are speakeasies. If you do not know the password or have the special knock, you won't be allowed into these areas. And this is how they keep it safe. Um, and finally, people just started making their own alcohol. It wasn't illegal in the West Indies or Canada, so they were importing it illegally from other countries. And if you couldn't get it imported, you have a bathtub, and you just make the alcohol in the bathtub or in the backyard or somewhere in the basement and sell it themselves. A lot of times there was a lot of alcohol content in this to make transportation easier. A lot of these things blew up because alcohol is flammable, and so it's very dangerous for a lot of people. All right, so some successes of this. The bank savings increased. Um, you weren't spending all your money on alcohol. You weren't going to the bar getting drunk every night. You save more money. Absenteeism from work decreases. People are not getting drunk and getting fired from their job or calling out from their job. So people are working harder, working more, making more money. And overall, there's less alcohol consumed. There's still a lot of it consumed, but less of it. Because even the people who were supposed to be enforcing these laws were still drinking on the side. Almost every single person was doing this illegally, even those who were supposed to enforce the fact that you weren't allowed to. All right, so guys, here's the classwork and homework. I'm not going to leave this slide up long because we are going to go over this in person. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I hope you guys really got something from this. Feel free to pause, rewind, whatever you have to do on this video to get that. All right, I'll talk to you all later.